Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views covering the topics we hope are relevant to you. Today, in a packed show, the RSS machine moves into attack mode as the Canadian Prime Minister starts pointing the finger of proof at its involvement in killing their political opponents across the world, including, of course, Khalistanis. In New York, was there an Indian connection to Mayor Adams as he's indicted? Here in the UK, as we look again at the Sikh Youth UK fraud case, evidence pointing to the British State colluding with the judiciary, law enforcement and indeed the mainstream media emerges to malign the Sikh population under pressure from India once again. More details emerge on the Australian Beadbi case, and Indian singer Gurdas Maan offers huge apologies to Sikhs across the world for insulting them, just as he tries to sell out his new tour of the US. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our amazing viewers. You may be noticing that I've got an orange shirt on today, and there's actually a reason for that. And it is National Day of Truth and Reconciliation in relation to our Indigenous population here in Canada. And the orange shirt is a national symbol of support. So that's why I decided to go with the orange shirt today, folks. So if anybody's watching us from our Indigenous community, happy Truth and Reconciliation Day.
Indeed. And James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course, as usual, we will be taking a look at lots of your great comments, which have been filling up below our videos. Thanks so much for those, as always. So James, let's get things underway. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
Well, let's take a look here. First, starting with Justin Trudeau, Canada's Prime Minister, and the Sikh population in Canada. It is now coming out in the foreign interference investigation and inquiry that's going on in Ottawa that not only did the Modi government and India potentially have involvement in the killing of Mr. Najjar, and also with Mr. Gupta's involvement in the murder for hire plot against the leader of Sikhs for Justice. But it turns out now that Modi also used his propaganda machine, aka the Indian media, to target Justin Trudeau and the Sikh community after Justin Trudeau, of course, very publicly named the government of India as potentially involved in the murder of the Sikh leader and Khalistan referendum movement leader in terms of the propaganda machine. Starting now, we're looking at, of course, the involvement of India. But what's really interesting here is that they've also stated that not only did Modi kick into high gear with the media from India to target these groups, but also they partnered up with China to some regard, that China also took advantage of the opportunity to really put out an anti-Canada narrative in their media and calling on the Canadian government, Justin Trudeau individually, and of course our Sikh community here in Canada. So the High Commissioner has been taking a lot of statements, a lot of testimony into the investigation. Now, not only are we talking about the extrajudicial killings of individuals, foreign citizens on foreign soil, but we're also talking about their interference in Canadian politics. And we recently did a story about the India involvement when it came to the Conservative Party of Canada leadership race and whether or not there's legitimacy to the appointment of Pierre Poilievre as that party's leader. Now, this is going on with the second round of the inquiry, and a lot more information is going to continue to come out, and we're going to be watching this. But really what was important is that they've actually come out and identified how Mr. Modi and the India government is targeting not only governments in Canada, but individuals as well as various communities, including, as I stated earlier, the Sikh community. And this is coming out with the organization, it's the RRM, and that essentially is the Foreign Department in Canada, They are monitoring news, media, social media, and other areas of communications and, of course, public address. And this is focused on India here in this report. But of course, as I said, previous reports, there's concerns from China, there's concerns from Russia, there's concerns from, of course, India when it comes to the interference in the Canadian election system. And of course, in the different communities, they are using social media and other media to really try to add a divisive and polarizing impact within Canadian politics and within Canadian communities to really push a narrative of hate, of separation, and of mistrust within the communities. Now, this here very clearly stated that Chinese state-controlled news outlets such as the Global Times and the Xinhua also joined in with robust coverage and opportunistic in replicating narratives from a range of Indian sources that put Canada in a negative light. And this also depicted Ottawa as being more isolated from our partners and allies than we really are, of course. You know, it's quite exaggerated. And I just wanted to point out this other paragraph that the tenor of the narratives was often heated, with commentators employed by Modi-aligned outlets posting that Prime Minister Trudeau and Canadian institutions were enablers of terrorism, falling on the laps of Khalistani extremists or treacherous against India. And again, of course, this is a narrative that India just continues to push without any facts, without any evidence. They always claim terrorism-related charges against anyone who speaks out against Modi and the BJP government in India. Now, that's all that it takes to be labeled a terrorist there. And that is why in previous inquiries and requests from India to deport people who are involved with the Khalistan movement, the government of Canada has denied it because there has been no real evidence or credible threat to India. It has been just the simple fact of people speaking out. Now, of course, that includes Justin Trudeau when he spoke out in the Parliament and called out India on their foreign interference and their potential involvement in the Jar murder. We all know how this is playing out. So again, this is India propping up themselves and going after Canada. At the same time, they're trying to increase trade, not only with Canada, but the US, the UK. And these governments are also very aware of the India government's foreign interference policies and procedures, as well as the increased levels of their participation on a global scale. With that said, Angus, of course, we know that, recent elections in the UK, I'm sure that they were watching very closely for foreign interference. But as I say, India has taken over the number 2 spot on the threat assessment list for Canada when it comes to foreign interference, which is really a big thing because of the fact that, that's Russia that they've bumped out of number 2, Angus.
Yeah, I think that is a particularly fascinating fact that comes out of this story, is that India, second only to China, attacking and influencing Canada. And I suppose it begs the question, why Canada? Well, clearly because of the diaspora, the Sikh diaspora. Of course, it's got this huge Sikh diaspora, and particularly it is one of the centres of this hugely growing movement of Khalistan, pro-Khalistan, which actually, in a strange sort of way, is a backhanded compliment to the strength of the Khalistan movement and how worried India must be about it now. Because despite a barrage of anti-Khalistan propaganda across social media and even mainstream media, clearly India is seriously rattled. When I say India, of course, I specifically refer to the RSS and the BJP. They are deeply rattled by this whole Khalistan movement. The referendum, I think, as it's been rolled out, has actually highlighted, not just to India, but to the world, and particularly Western democracies, Firstly, just how huge the pro-Khalistan movement is, but secondly, it's also highlighted and brought to the world's attention just what's going on in India and why is this Khalistan movement so vocal and so particularly vocal about the oppression it has been placed under the Indian government. Because, of course, Narendra Modi and the BJP, as Narendra Modi strides across the global stage, he comes across as this benign figure leading the world's largest democracy. So people have, in the past, taken that at face value. They see India as this sort of wonderful, spiritual, mystical land of yoga and wonderful things like that. And Narendra Modi, this grandfatherly figure. And yet the Khalistanis are now in the mainstream media, waving their wonderfully colourful yellow flags and talking about what's actually happening in India. And people are starting to wake up. And so suddenly people are realising, hang on a second, there's actually a different story going on here about India. This India that we thought was one thing is in fact something completely different. And I think the tide is turning globally against the BJP and the RSS. People, even from outside the minority communities and even the mainstream communities across the West, are now starting to look at India with a very different light. And as I said, James, I think this is really rattling India. And this whole terrorism angle, this narrative that they've been leaning on and relying on for so long is starting to fall apart. Firstly, because over the last decade or two, India have painted Khalistani activists as terrorists, and they've allegedly shown CSIS in Canada, MI5 and 6 here in the UK, and CIA in the US. They've shown all this evidence, supposedly saying these guys are terrorists, these Khalistanis are terrorists. But actually, there has been no legal action against the Khalistani activists, or certainly no legal action that has proved these allegations as true. In other words, they're not terrorists. And again, this is now reaching mainstream media that the Khalistan movement is nothing to do with terrorism. It is a peaceful, democratic movement. And again, this is a narrative that counteracts the narrative coming out of India. And once again, I'll repeat that India is clearly rattled. And the only way they can fight back, other than transnational oppression and basically outright cold-blooded murder of its political opponents, which it's tried and has now been come under the spotlight for doing so because they've been caught in the act, they're now having to resort to this huge underhand movement, this subtle movement across the media, trying to use influencers, trying to use the media that they can get their grip on to try and send out this other narrative, the Indian narrative, which again has been put in the spotlight and again has been highlighted by commissions like this. Investigations at a governmental level are now finding out what India are up to behind the scenes. Again, we're lifting the lid on India's actions over the last 10, 20 years, maybe even going back even further. And every time we lift a lid, every time we lift a layer, whether it's in Canada, the UK or in the US or Australia, we're finding a pretty dirty stain underneath those layers. A pretty dirty campaign, obviously headed up by RAW and the NIA, and it all goes back ultimately to the RSS, trying to maintain control, trying to maintain their grip on this narrative, which is falling apart. Hence, again, James, why the Khalistan movement is growing, why the Sikh community, their profile is growing. The movement, the momentum is clearly pro-Khalistan, and India are just plainly hating it.
Absolutely, Angus. And of particular interest as well is just on August the 28th, it also was announced that Inderjit Singh Gosal, who has taken over the Khalistan movement here in Surrey, and the campaign, he actually had a visit from the police stating that there are credible threats to his life. So it shows that even with the spotlight on India, they still haven't backed down in their transnational oppression and, you know, the potential involvement in more assassinations. I mean, it's just unbelievable that with all these eyes and investigations going on, they're still acting as though, you know, there's nothing going on and that they're completely innocent. So it shows that they are just not willing to learn from, you know, from being called out.
I think it's desperation, James. It is the desperate final acts of a state that's been caught in the act. And it is just, as I said, it's just so terrified of losing control of the narrative that it is literally resorting to desperate tactics, even though it knows it has been caught in the act. The evidence is out there now. India is not being shown in a great light these days.
No, absolutely not. And it's just amazing how far they're going to go. And that takes us on to our next story, Angus. And again, we're still looking at foreign interference. Now, just this week, a federal indictment, it's actually 57 pages long, it came out against Mayor Adams of New York City, of course, debatably one of the most powerful cities in the world, but of course, one of the most in the U.S. at least. And there is a lot of information about bribery, corruption, collusion, foreign interference. I mean, the list goes on and on when it comes to the charges that he will be facing, as well as some of his staffers. And this also has some interesting India twists and potential connections. Although there hasn't been any direct announcement about India in terms of the foreign interference, it has been shown in the indictment that Mayor Adams did visit India during some of these questionable trips and during the whole bribery scandal. But not only that, but the mayor also was, and his staffers, were giving the impression to people in Turkey and other countries around the world that the mayor would be very likely taking over as president of the United States at some point in the near future. So, of course, that has concerns if they are looking forward to his placement or his election being successful in the running for president of the United States over the next several terms or the next several elections. What do they know, and how far is this foreign interference going that they have this inside information? Or was it only used to really curry power and favor with the people in Turkey, with India, and other nations in which the mayor visited? Now, there's a lot of power in New York. There's a lot of position there. And what really comes out is that he was taking bribes to put people from different diasporas and communities in positions of power on different committees for the city, and just a whole slew of different charges. Now, the federal attorney, Damian Williams, in the Southern District of New York federal courts, has not ruled out more charges coming down, and very clearly states that the investigation is ongoing. There's a lot of different, like an octopus, a lot of tentacles out there that are far-reaching and are having a lot of impact when it comes to that interference. I'm going to pull up here the indictment itself, but I've only bringing up a few pages that I wanted to refer to because I don't want to bore you and put you to sleep. For one, with the full indictment, but also because our show, we're always fighting for time as it is, Angus, so I don't want to pull too much up. But I just wanted to demonstrate a couple of the points where India is brought into the investigation. Now, of course, Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, and it was a sealed indictment which has now been unsealed for public viewing. And as we go down, you can see that there were trips, but here it is the valuable trips he accepted from the Turkish Airlines and other business individuals. Was free tickets for him, his wife, or others to go to many different points: China, Sri Lanka, Turkey, France, but of course also to India. And that is where the questions are. How far-reaching is the Indian government and the raw agency when it comes to their involvement in U.S. politics? This becomes very essential, especially given that we're only a few months away from an election, or about 6 weeks away from a federal election in the U.S. that's already very polarizing from both sides, whether it's Kamala Harris or whether it's Donald Trump going to be named the next president. Of course, foreign interference is a major hot button topic in the election. and it goes back and forth from each side. So it's important for us to understand that although the information here is mostly based on Turkish involvement with the Mayor of New York, there are India links here, and I think those really need to be looked at further. The campaign reaped over $10 million in matching funds based on the contributions of foreign individuals, filtering money and straw donations through whether it is business people who own corporations or businesses in the U.S. putting the money through to his campaign in the name of employees or other entities throughout the U.S. So there's a lot there, and as I said, the foreign interference and the indictment is just scathing in the scope and the reach of what he and his staff have been doing. I brought up this section here, just a summary on the top line, of course, is the free upgrade to business class for two on a round trip ticket from New York to India. So that was in 2016. And again, that would have been around a time of election in the US. And again, it's still ongoing. So it's not as though they said that it only happened in 2016. That was just one example of him traveling to India. And this has been going on right up until and during the investigation. He knew he was under investigation and still was taking actions to not only cover up the bribery and all of these other charges, but he was still participating in taking foreign money and gifts, things that add up to, millions of dollars to the New York and the U.S. taxpayers. But also that underscores the need for more transparency and the level of corruption in U.S. politics, which is, I say U.S. politics, but we know that it is a worldwide issue, Angus.
Yeah, I was going to say this is it's just a story that probably occurs in every country on the planet. Politicians for sale. Unfortunately, politics does seem to attract some of the worst of our society, which is a very sad thing. People who are inherently driven by money and power. And of course, in positions of power like that, it will attract an awful lot of money. And it will attract people willing to spend money to influence, to have their narrative and their agenda in that position of power. Clearly, this guy has been caught, and well done to the Department of Justice for uncovering all of this interference, this foreign interference. Now, of course, politicians are vulnerable, should we say, to lobbying from all sides. Of course, they are lobbied on a regular basis by industry, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's agriculture, or whatever. Mobile phones, it could be anything. So there is a quite a high level of, shall we call it, legal lobbying, which goes on. And of course, there is a line that then crosses over into criminality, where of course money starts changing hands, etc. And of course, lobbying can come from other countries, and that's actually where the line is closer to criminality more than anything else, because of course if another country's agenda starts influencing domestic politics in that country, it has big implications. It has a big impact. And very clearly here, this Mayor Adams has been caught out, it appears, allegedly, being heavily influenced, certainly by Turkey. But of course, where Turkey goes, I think India has been very close on the heels of Turkey, realising, hey, here's a politician for sale, and a very powerful person, a very powerful and influential individual. Let's get in there as well, because of course, if we can get into the Mayor of New York, that's a big door to get into. It can have a lot of influence in this very powerful city. So it wouldn't surprise me if India have been in there. They might not be at the front of the queue in terms of offering benefits and financial incentives, but certainly they appear to be there in the mix. Yes, James, it is a very sad story of politics. Of course, not all politicians are stained by this, thank heavens, but there certainly are, it turns out, and it's happened throughout history. There are people in positions of power who are amenable to influence, and of course financial influence is the most powerful, and of course there will always be those who want to use those individuals who are amenable to that for their own benefit as well. Clearly India has got a very deep purse, it has very deep pockets to spend a lot of money to buy influence around the world. It's found it in Canada, it's certainly found it here in the UK, and no doubt in the US, and obviously it's found it in New York particularly. So yeah, well done to the Department of Justice there, James. I think this is probably only one of many individuals who exist who've been up to no good like this.
Absolutely, and it'll be important to watch this as, of course, none of the allegations have been proven in a court of law as of yet. But a big part of it, New Yorkers may be asking how this is impacting their bottom line when it comes to the financial end. But New York actually is a city that has a contribution matching program. So when they receive donations from individuals and others to a legitimate and popular campaign that has wheels, of course, the city puts money towards matching campaign contributions, and that comes from the taxpayers of New York City. So it impacts every person in New York, whether they realize it or not.
Yeah, buying influence is essentially a criminal act, but buying influence does take many forms. And one form that, of course, India have proved themselves very effective at is, of course, buying influencers and those in the media. Now, my first story refers to an Indian singer by the name of Gurdas Maan. Now, Gurdas Maan is an Indian singer, is a songwriter and is an actor. He's very, very well known amongst the subcontinent. He is mainly associated with Punjabi language music and films, and he actually gained national attention. Particularly, he's quite an old. I've got to be careful what I say here. I think he's in his late 60s. He's not that old, but he's been around for a long time, and he gained national attention in the early 1980s, particularly with a song called Dil Da Mamla Hai. And since then, he went on to record over 34 albums and has written over 305 songs. But this gentleman, Mr. Maan, has been widely known to be a bit of a tool of the Indian state, particularly obviously of the RSS. And he's been spreading the RSS agenda across his sphere of influence, which of course is pretty huge, being a very well-known singer and actor. Now, it turns out, of course, that he might have sold his soul to the RSS, but of course he's actually quite concerned that he's actually been upsetting quite a large part of his audience. That, of course, is the Punjabi-speaking world. Right. Now, he actually has had now to seek forgiveness for his what have been called objectionable remarks made about the Punjabi language and the use of the Punjabi language, which of course is the mother tongue of the Punjab. A couple of weeks before his tour to the United States kicks off, and his shows are scheduled to start actually, I think, in the next week or two, he's had to make a rather large apology. And he's made another attempt to make the Sikh community pardon him for, quote, all incidents that happened in the past, which unintentionally apparently hurt anyone's sentiments. I don't think they were that unintentional. And he said, if my words have hurt anyone's sentiments, I apologise by holding my ears and withholding my hands. So it is a well-known fact that that Maan has always played into the hands of the Indian state. He has actually sold his soul, as I said, to the RSS. And he has been acting as this effective tool of the Indian system. And the Indian state, as we know, has worked very hard to suppress the Sikh struggle through people in the media and through singers, influential singers like himself, particularly the armed Sikh movement during the 1980s. And it turns out that Mr. Maan had very close ties to a very notorious police officer, KPS Gill, otherwise known as the Butcher of Punjab. Now, Gill headed up the Punjabi police in the 1990s. And of course, we've reported regularly on the dreadful activities, the extrajudicial killings that went on, just the outrageous criminal acts of the Punjabi police force across the late 1980s and the 1990s. And it was headed up by this KPS Gill, who was rightly named the Butcher of Punjab. He has since died. And the relationship of Maan can be gauged from the fact that in November 2004, he had the music of his Punjabi feature film Des Hoya Pardes. It was released by the Butcher of Punjab, KPS Gill, who at the time was the president of the Indian Hockey Federation at Sector 22 Chandigarh. The movie was produced by his wife Manjeet Maan, And it, unsurprisingly, depicted the Sikh movement in a very malign and poor light. And talking about the film script during the release of the film, Gurdas Maan referred to the Sikh movement as, quote, terrorism. And he said at the time, it is an effort to portray the suffering of the common man. This film is set in the Punjab during the period of terrorism, and very deliberately used that word terrorism. It was not terrorism that was going on in the Punjab. It was simply literally a fight, a struggle for survival. It was a fight back against this outrageous wave of extrajudicial killing. It was cold-blooded murder by the police against the local Sikh population, where almost a whole generation of young Sikh men were murdered in cold blood across the countryside. It was a fight for survival by the Sikh community. It was not terrorism. If there was any terrorism going on, it was of course by the Indian state. Now, Maan faced a pretty fierce backlash after he endorsed the then BJP National President Amit Shah's batting for a one nation, one language idea in September 2019. Now, this is really where this current furore stems from, is that Gurdas Maan has been a huge supporter of essentially driving out the Punjabi language in replacing it with a one nation, one language concept. And commenting on those who were protesting against the whole idea, he said, the uproar is made on WhatsApp or social media by those who don't have any other work to do. Making negative comments against others has become very common on social media. Those who are sincere in promoting their mother tongue and culture continue their work with their own way. So basically, he's really minimised and really insulted anybody who argued against this whole concept. Basically saying, they've got nothing better to do. They're just mischief makers across social media. It's a pretty sad and demeaning insult to the people of Punjab, who are basically fighting just to speak their own native language, which they've spoken for generations and indeed centuries. It is necessary, he says, that one nation must have one language so that one could get his words understood, even in South India. If you could not do so, what's the use of being a Hindustani? That word Hindustani, essentially it's this Hindu Rashtra again. For instance, France has its own language and people speak it. Germany has one language, entire country speaks. And if our country speaks one language, what's wrong with it? Well, unfortunately, France and Germany actually do have many of their own actual different dialects and languages. And there are many countries like Spain, for example, that has Basque and Catalan. Here in the UK, we've got Gaelic, we've got Welsh, we've got many individual languages, which we do not drive out. We do the opposite. We actually try to encourage and avoid the loss of these parts of our inherent cultures. So I'm sorry, Mr. Maan, this argument really just does not wash. And he says, if we are emphasising so much on the mother tongue, the emphasis should also be laid on auntie, or the Hindustani language. When asked to clarify his words in a press conference, he kept his words supporting the one nation, one language idea. The mother tongue should be respected and preferred. But being Indians, there must be our one language. So again, he's pushing this whole Hindustani agenda. And among this backlash, Punjabi Sikh activists held a demonstration outside the venues, or certainly one of the venues, which carrying placards like "Traitor of Punjab Mother Tongue." And a Sikh activist named Charanjit Singh Sujan started the protest with a placard inside the auditorium. Unsurprisingly, Maan has actually tendered an apology because he's trying to sell tickets and is actually realising that his stance, his anti-Sikh and anti-Punjabi stance, is hurting his ticket sales. The question is, will that apology be accepted by the Punjabi community? Well, we'll see. And in 2021, Maan hurt Sikh sentiments during an event in Nakadar when he said Ladi Shah, the chief of Dera Murad Shah, is a descendant of the third Sikh Guru, Sri Guru Amar Das Ji. Though Maan had apologised again when members of the community protested. The case was registered against him for hurting religious sentiments. It turns out, unsurprisingly, the police filed a cancellation report in the case in 2024. So once again, the Indian state works to protect its own. He also sang objectionable songs. He's promoting drugs in a song titled Apna Punjab Hove Gar Di Sharab Hove. Don't know if I pronounced that right, but basically it was one of his songs that unbelievably promoted drugs. And of course we talk regularly about this deliberate agenda to flood the Punjab with drugs, something that Amritpal Singh and many others have stood up against. We know where it's coming from. It is a deliberate agenda to weaken the Punjab. Now, reacting to the fresh apology, Sujan, the Sikh activist, said, "It's not an apology, it's a drama. It's generally seen that first shows are scheduled, the promotions carried out, and when these shows face protests, an apology drama is performed." Of course it is. He's worried that his ticket sales are affected. And he advocated, Maan, of course, advocated the one nation, one language idea of the Indian Home Minister Amit Shah. That character comes up yet again. He must clarify, and Sujan goes on to say he must clarify whether he condemns this fascist idea or not. So if you're apologising, then you've got to condemn the idea, but I don't see much condemnation coming from Mr. Maan. This idea kills cultural and linguistic identities, and it promotes cultural assimilation. Exactly. This is why they are trying to drive out the Punjabi language, particularly in the schools, where even Punjabi kids, Sikh children, are not allowed to speak their indigenous language, their Punjabi language. The idea is fatal for the ethnic minorities living in the Indian subcontinent. Gurdas Maan is called a traitor of Punjabi because he endorsed the idea of imposing Hindi over the mother tongue of all Punjabis, Sujan added. Indeed, again, back to the schools, they are introducing Hindi as the main language, deliberately to try and oppress and drive out the indigenous culture of Sikhi and the Punjabi language. And Sikh leaders are also seeing his tour as an attempt to derail the community's struggle for independence. And actually there's a whole argument saying that the whole tour, and particularly the reason why Maan is coming to the US, is because, again, James, when I was talking about the Indian establishment and the RSS rattled about this hugely growing Khalistan movement, is that they're now trying to push out Indian culture, Hindustani, Hindu Rashtra, RSS culture. They're trying to get the people like Gurdas Maan out into the Western world, trying again to promote the Hindu culture, promote Hindustani culture, this whole Rashtra idea, and again to try and bury the Khalistan movement. So it's a multilateral approach by India to try and push the Indian narrative at the expense of the Sikh narrative. And of course, we had Rahul Gandhi, who spoke recently a few weeks ago, highlighting what's going on, what the RSS are up to in India. And of course, we had the referendum being rolled out again, which again has highlighted the Khalistan movement and what's going on in India. So all this is believed to be a bit of a pushback by the Indian state to try and again get the Indian narrative on top rather than the Sikh and the Khalistani narrative on top. And of course, we had Kangana Ranaut and her latest film Emergency coming out, again part of this desperate pushback by India, James, to try and regain control of the narrative. But it does seem that they are struggling, primarily because the Sikh community around the world, particularly across the diaspora, they're up in arms against it. They are out in the streets, they are protesting, and it is working. We're seeing legislation introduced in the US against transnational oppression to highlight what India's up to. We see the movements in Canada, the massive movements in Canada, less so in the UK, but of course the UK Sikh community is fighting. It is very vocal. So we're seeing a huge backlash against India across the Western world, James. It's very encouraging, I would say.
Absolutely. And just the fact that the Khalistan movement has made it this far and really has gotten the ears of people outside of the Sikh diaspora is very essential, because people are starting to wake up and see the steps that a foreign government is willing to take in order to influence politics outside of their own borders, but also how they target groups of people and their own citizens. I mean, it's just disgusting, but it's great to see how the world is really opening their eyes to it, Angus.
Indeed. It's, as I think I said earlier, the Indian states are getting pretty desperate in their tactics, because they are clearly rattled about what's going on. Their reputation is falling apart, and as it declines, the rise of the Khalistan movement is replacing it. So Interesting times. Now I'm going to rush on because we are running out of time as always. And my next story is an important one. It's a very significant one. And unfortunately, I would like to spend more time on this than we have because it does highlight a lot of issues. I reported the other day about this case of the Sikh Youth UK and a fraud case against two individuals of Sikh Youth UK or linked to Sikh Youth UK. And this story just highlights a really big issue and a big problem we have here in the UK. And I've often highlighted the British state and I've questioned, why is the British state so aligned with the Indian state against the Sikh community? And it does stand in contrast to the Americas and indeed Australia to a large degree. And more evidence of this is emerging on quite a regular basis. And the Sikh Youth UK situation highlights a very interesting angle to all this. Now, I read, when I was looking at the SYUK story, I actually read a BBC report on this, and it was quite damning against these two individuals who were found guilty of fraud, of charity fraud. And this BBC report, it's a very short report, and just quickly whizzing through it, you read it and you think, God, these two were up to no good. Clearly they've been, as we say in England, banged to rights. They've been caught, they've been found guilty, they deserve everything they get. So let's pick out some of the key elements of this story as reported by the BBC. This is the state broadcasting company of the UK. And a woman has been found guilty of stealing money from a charity and then trying to cover it up with the help of a brother. They took money from the charity to pay off personal debts and sending money to others, including family members. Convicted of 6 counts of theft and money laundering, misleading the Charity Commission. They applied to set up the charity, but the Charity Commission shut it down after failing to get enough information. And they collected donations, which was then siphoned off. The force said that Ms. Kaur, guilty Ms. Kaur, had more than 50 personal bank accounts in an attempt to make it as complicated as possible to follow the flow of stolen money. And they'd attempted to portray themselves as financially naive. It sounds pretty damning, doesn't it? These two sound like pretty nasty criminals. It does, doesn't it? Well, actually, let's dig a little deeper. Let's peel back some of the layers of this story. Let's actually find out the truth of what's going on. Well, it's now been reported by human rights representatives, people behind the scenes from the Sikh community, who've actually stood up and said, hang on. Let's actually reveal some of the truth of this story. And they've had to go out in public to do this. And they've said that the whole portrayal of these two individuals has been wholly inaccurate. It's deliberately designed not just to malign these two, not just to malign Sikh Youth UK, but to malign the whole community, the whole Sikh community. And of course, it all comes back to, once again, the West Midlands Police, who we've talked about regularly, and their collusion with India, and particularly the counter-terrorism unit. And it's been very clear that this unit has had an agenda for many years against the local Sikh community. They have been working very closely with India, the Indian intelligence agency, and it all again links through to Jagtar Singh Johal. Yes, Jaggy once again crops up, and the West Midlands 3, which we talked about. In 2018, the CTU, the counter-terrorism unit, launched what was called Operation Takuma, which was again this anti-Sikh community operation to dig out what they called terrorism within the Sikh community. But of course, this all stems back from pressure from India, because India are terrified of the Khalistan movement. All these people that have been targeted by the West Midlands Police are Khalistani activists. And as a result, pressure from India, West Midlands Police have been manipulated and pressured into acting against them. And of course, we had this raid against 5 Sikh homes back in 2018, again linked to Jaggi, and the 5 homes included 2 of the West Midlands 3 and 2 other Sikh activists. It was actually an Indian-led operation for Britain to corroborate allegations against Jagtar Singh Johal. And at the time, the Hindustan Times reported in 2018, they actually reported in their newspaper back in India the raids at the West Midlands and Leicester residences of these individuals and their 3 close associates, Kuldeep Singh Lahal and somebody else who's been redacted, are being seen as an outcome of diplomatic pressure created by the Indian agencies on Britain about the involvement of those living in the country holding anti-Indian terror activities. So it all comes back to India pressuring the UK, who have said, yeah, okay, we believe you, we'll act on your behalf, and we'll start oppressing and raiding these people in the Sikh community. We will start intimidating and actually terrorising and harassing these families. So after 8 months of forensically examining dozens of electronic devices, bank accounts and thousands of communications, no evidence was found to corroborate India's allegations. So the CTU have gone through, they poured through thousands of communications, bank accounts, everything. They could find no evidence that supported India's allegations. So it did leave them a little bit embarrassed about what had happened. And there was no prospect of criminal charges. They couldn't go back to India and say, oh, we got them, well done. Unfortunately, they've actually found absolutely no evidence. And so, of course, after all this activity, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of taxpayers' money poured into Operation Takuma, they come up with absolutely nothing. So what do? And so, of course, it's no doubt that the chiefs in the CTU said, look, this is a little bit embarrassing. We're going to have to come up with something to show for our efforts and all the resources that we poured into this. So they then focused on the poor little Sikh Youth UK, this small little outfit who's made up of a very small number of Sikhs who had just been trying to do good and trying to raise awareness of not just the Khalistan movement, but of course Sikh issues locally in the Midlands of the UK. So they ordered the Charity Commission, of all things, to open a statutory inquiry. In 2019, Deepa Singh, he's one of the founders of Sikh Youth, and his sister were charged by the CTU. The case went to court just this month. During the trial, the judge, and this is where it starts getting interesting and slightly political, the judge barred any arguments relating to Jagtar Singh Johal, despite Johal's name being listed in the court papers. The actual case was Johal, Kaur and Lahal versus Regina. That's Queen, who's now, of course, the king, because the case was initiated during when the Queen was still alive. So the case was actually Johal, Kaur and Lahal versus the state. So for some reason, the judge says, no, we're not going to talk anything about Johal. Why not? That's a big red flag, isn't it? So Kaur, Ms. Kaur, who's named in the case, has never been arrested before. She suffers from significant mental health issues. She was interrogated for over 8 hours by the CTU, who basically broke her down and essentially just took advantage of her mental state. And they confused and disorientated her for hours. It's a typical police tactic, this, of course. And I do sympathise with the police. And let me just make it very clear, I am not anti-police. But clearly, something has gone very wrong here. There is a clear agenda at play. I'm very pro-law enforcement. I'm very pro-police. But something has influence here. There is political influence affecting the normal course of the rule of law here. And that's what we're highlighting here. It's very important to make that distinction. So while the Sikh Youth UK was established, Deepa Singh's family initially funded most of the projects with their own money. Ms. Kaur serving as the main contributor, using her personal account for the costs. Now, as often happened here, the family had initiated these projects. There was no money in the accounts, so the family itself funded the accounts with their own money to fund these projects, which then subsequently were funded by donations. So the family rightly took the money back to repay what they'd put in. And of course, this is the premise of the whole case that the Charity Commission investigation jumped upon, saying, no, you're withdrawing money and giving it to the family. Despite the fact this money was the family's in the first place, they were refunding their own money. That is the whole, what actually happened. And this whole thing has been twisted by the BBC, by the media, by the whole legal thing. Etc., etc. I don't want to go into the details because unfortunately, I would love to go into the details of this because it just proves how biased and prejudiced this whole case and how twisted and manipulated the whole case has been. But the information is out there. Do look for yourselves if you want to actually see the facts behind this. The following was not taken into consideration in the case. Sikh UK is not a registered charity. So why was the Charity Commission investigating in the first place? The whole premise is flawed. Neither Deepa nor Ms Kaur had any experience of understanding charity law. Why would they? The whole thing wasn't a charity. There was no acknowledgement that they both invested significantly more into their projects than what was reimbursed. So they actually lost out on this. They poured their own money into these projects and they got less back than they put in. The so-called stolen funds were almost immediately used to fund the projects. No recognition of the time and energy they both dedicated without taking any salary from the projects. Now here's an interesting thing. We talked about remember those 50 bank accounts that the BBC said, oh, yeah, the 50 bank accounts. So they clearly set up this whole network of bank accounts. Yeah, that's what fraudsters tend to do. They set up bank accounts here, there and everywhere to try and hide and bury the evidence, make it very hard to follow the trail of money. Do you know what those 50 bank accounts were? Here's a very classic example of how the truth can be twisted to suit a narrative. They had 3 main bank accounts, 3 accounts. Do you know what the rest were? They were store card accounts. You know those cards you get for department stores and things. They were online shopping accounts. They were PayPal accounts. They were saving accounts dating back over 40 years, most of which had now closed. Do you start to see a pattern here? So these 50 bank accounts that were supposedly used to launder money is an absolute nonsense. Again, it's a manipulation of the facts to suit a narrative. And again, it's reported the allegations of theft and money laundering are false. How can someone steal their own money? It was their own money that they'd put into these projects that they were then taking back. It really comes down to what the legal team say. It was simply poor bookkeeping and administration. It was naivety. They weren't a charity and therefore subject to all the rightful regulations and oversight and accountability that any charity absolutely should have to avoid fraudulent situations. They were just naive. They set up these projects themselves. They weren't designed to fall into the Charity Commission's regulations. They were just running it themselves. They're not accountants. They were just putting money into these projects, setting up the projects, and then when funds started coming in from the community, they then took the money out to repay, at least even partly repay the money that they'd put in. So again, the whole thing is deeply flawed. And again, more details were given about the whole political involvement in this. Etc., etc. And I would love to spend more time going through all this. But in conclusion, Sikh Human Rights believes the jury was changed out 4 times during this trial. How do you ensure that a jury remains confused about the whole thing and then defaults? It's been proven psychologically that it will always default towards the state. Well, the jury was changed out 4 times. So how actually cognizant will that final jury have been of all the reality, the truth that was in this trial? Again, it makes the whole thing very, very suspicious. So in conclusion, Sikh Human Rights believe the jury was misled. The judge displayed bias. It turns out during Ms Kaur's cross-examination, the judge actually seemed to be more prejudiced pro the CPS, that's the prosecution, on several occasions by joining in on the questioning and took a biased stance in his legal directions to the jury, often undermining the defence. So it appears, although none of us were present there, it would appear, according to the Sikh Human Rights, that even the judge was clearly having an agenda here. And I'm always very reluctant to call out our judiciary because it does, on the whole, tend to be pretty unbiased. But it does appear that there is an agenda at play here. And there is apparently an application to appeal the decision underway now. So, James, it's quite concerning, this, I have to say. Normally, the rule of law is practised impartially across the West, but quite often politics does play a part in the judiciary. There have been many cases, particularly relating to issues like this, where the judiciary, at least on the face of it, does appear to have been influenced by higher up in the state, where the state has clearly lent on the judiciary and said it would be very convenient if this case falls in a certain way. And it would appear this the outcome of this case does seem to align with a general trend of the British state oppressing the Sikh community. And I have to be very careful what I say here, because of course it is an ongoing case. But it does appear that there is a very questionable process going on here. It is very clear that this case did fall very conveniently in on behalf of the state, James. I raise eyebrows. I'm sure it does it yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at it on the face of the information presented herein, it looks to me like, most business owners and corporations know that in the early stages, they have what are called shareholder loans, where there are funds put into the company or the corporate entity from the shareholders or the founder and such. And then at a later time, when there is profitability or money brought into the company, then they're able to recover those loans. And it seems here maybe the bookkeeping and the paperwork wasn't as, it wasn't as efficient as it should have been. That to me, it just, spells out to me that's what they were doing. And that was just shareholder loans essentially to keep the projects rolling, Angus.
Exactly that. And that is essentially what has happened. And it was down to their own naivety, which has been taken advantage of by the CTU. So we'll keep an eye on this case. We will keep reporting it. As I say, I wish we had more time to give more detail, because it's quite shocking. And again, the BBC joining in the whole state, the whole state wave of propaganda against these people. So. Right, let me rush through my final story again, because we're way over time once again. The quick update in Australia, this Beadbi crime. And it turns out that this gentleman who's been charged with this dreadful crime against the Holy Scriptures, the Granth Sahib Ji, excuse me, and this guy uploaded videos to TikTok that quickly went viral. It sparked international outrage and protests across Melbourne as well. It was widely condemned by the local community, but he's been caught. He will be sentenced next month. Maninderjit Singh, a Sikh community spokesman, has said it is likely that this guy is going to get away with simply a fine. And so Maninderjit Singh said, he explained that the Gurdas Sahib is more than just a sacred book to the Sikh community. It's a living guru who's worshipped above all else. And he did highlight just how important these scriptures are to the Sikh community. And any offence, whatever it happens to be, has to be treated with the most highest criminality, because it is so deeply offensive. And Mr. Singh said the community was concerned that Hayat would only be fined. This is the guy who's being found guilty. He was concerned that Hayat would only be fined for what he did, saying that they believed he should be jailed. He should be sentenced to a maximum imprisonment, or should be deported even. So pretty fierce words as well, if they're not a part of this country, if they're not a citizen here. I think we should fail as a society if these sorts of individuals are let out again. How do we know he won't commit these sorts of offences again? We would like to push for stricter sacrilege laws so these sorts of individuals are not let off with a slap on the wrist. So, yeah, James, just a quick update on that. I think crimes of sacrilege like this should be treated a little bit more seriously than just a simple slap on the wrist and a fine.
Absolutely. I mean, it's clearly a hate crime with, with other circumstances that need to be addressed. And, he impacted a whole community, not an individual, which, makes it even that much worse. So.
Indeed. So, okay, let's rush into the comment section now. And as I say, we're well over time already. A lot to cover today. So, unfortunately, we'll go through these very quickly. Avatar Singh, how many politicians in the Five Eyes are linked to the RSS and the BJP? Good question. I wonder how many people in our establishments are linked to the RSS. A good question, James. Probably very many, I would say.
Absolutely. And we've seen the Five Eyes involved in the Niger case with information on that. So, yeah, it's, what side are they on, or are they playing both sides, Angus?
Indeed. Mohanda also talks about the RSS and their historic links to the Nazis. We do know, and we have actually mentioned in the past, as have indeed other commenters, how the RSS visited the Nazis, I think in the 1930s. They do follow the same philosophy. It must be the right-wing British hobnobbing with them, indeed. And we talk about the UK is sucked up to India. We talked about trade deals and the UK. Well, again, I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, unfortunately, because of time. But yeah, the UK, the British state and their links to the RSS, we've talked about a lot. It does raise a question. And Minder Singh has the same question since 2005. Why is the UK playing a double game? My opinion is the UK knows if it doesn't control Sikhs now, the world will look at Sikhs as more democratic than the UK's hierarchy system. And they talks about the caste system. Yeah, the UK does have quite an inherent class system. It's nowhere near as strong and inherent and in fact as evil as the caste system. But this raises a very interesting point, James, here, is that the whole structure of Sikh democracy, which actually existed in the times of the Sikh Empire in the 19th century, it actually is democracy in one of its purest forms, and it does actually hold up the Western world's democracy to account. In fact, it's arguable that even our democracy here in the West isn't actually as pure and effective as as was in the Sikh Empire, and indeed will be in Khalistan. James, any quick comments on that one?
No, let's move right along here, Angus. We're running out of time.
We're rushing through here at a rate of knots. It's such a shame because we'd love to go into a second hour on these. Cruella says, can we interview the politicians as to why the Jaggi case is not taken seriously? Good question. Maybe we will. I have actually been trying to get hold of some of our Sikh politicians here in the UK to talk to them about what is going on. But keep an eye out in the next 24, 48 hours. I am interviewing Jaggi's brother this very afternoon. I am going to be asking him, Gurpreet, lots of questions about this. So hopefully keep an eye out for that interview uploaded in the next day or two. 1S1 and 2 says, as soon as I saw the article about Sikh Youth UK, I knew that it was a political and corrupt agenda driving the news and the lies. Indeed, as we have talked about and we just talked about just now. Absolutely bang on. Very suspicious. Now, an interesting thread popped up here. Not an angry one, and actually a very sensible and very interesting discussion between APS Rosary and Cruella. How will Khalistan exist when all the Sikhs are leaving the Punjab and moving abroad? Good question. Well, how can indeed? Well, Cruella says, well, India exists and all the Hindus are leaving. But APS Rosary comes back and says, but India already exists as a country and is much larger, both in terms of population and size. So how can you make a new country when basically everybody's leaving? To which Cruella says, a lot will go back. With enough Sikhs there, some are coming back to their roots. This is really important. This is actually a very good discussion, this. And Rosary comes back and says, I highly doubt it. Sikhs will do anything to live in the West. Look at the illegal border crossings. So basically many are leaving and trying to get into the US and other places illegally. Well, the point here, firstly, I think there are, as we've reported, enough Sikhs in the Punjab who are very pro-Khalistan. Not just enough. There are, it would appear, the majority are pro-Khalistan already in the Punjab, as has been evidenced by the election of Amritpal Singh and others on a pro-Khalistani ticket. So we've seen at the actual elections that there is a strong pro-Khalistan force there. And the other point here, and I'm going to address this to our audience, the question that APS Rosary raises here, but everybody's left, all the Khalistanis are left, they're out in the diaspora. If Khalistan, or not if, when Khalistan becomes a reality, would you in the diaspora move back to Khalistan? Would you move back to the Punjab and Khalistan? That's a very interesting question. I don't know. Would many of you go back? I suspect many will. There are many first and second generation Sikhs in the community. I know the second, third generation here in the UK. Would you up sticks and go and live in Khalistan? It's a lot warmer. That's one thing that would attract me. But I wonder, James, the huge diaspora in Canada and across the US, I wonder if many would go to Khalistan. Would you uproot your lives in North America and go live in Khalistan? An interesting concept.
Well, it is a very interesting concept, and something I think that was left out of this this debate back and forth, Angus, is how many people of non-Sikh origin would want to live in Khalistan as well. You have, the Khalistan movement is not just about Sikhs. It's about having a homeland that honors the opportunity and the rights of every individual to be themselves, no matter who they worship as a religion, no matter where they come from. It's just such an inviting and open society that Khalistan would be, that people of non-Sikh background would love to live there as well, in my opinion anyway.
I've no doubt, and I think you're absolutely bang on there, James, because I have no doubt Khalistan will reflect the whole concept and philosophy of the original Sikh Empire in the 19th century.
Right.
And if it is, it really will stand not just as a beacon of democracy, but a beacon of equality, quality of life. It's just got so much going for it. It's huge. It will be hugely naturally resourced. They've got the wonderful 5 rivers, the agriculture. It's, as I say, there is so much socially, economically, commercially, and just simple geography that is so attractive. I think you're absolutely right, James. I think many people, and in particular across India, will migrate to Khalistan. So let's hope it happens in the foreseeable future so we can report on it, James.
That's right. Not to mention the biggest and best resource are the Sikh people.
Absolutely. Spot on, James. Good point. Right, and we had a couple of very lengthy and very interesting comments from 1S1NT and S. Baines. Unfortunately, again, we don't have time to go through those. So thank you for those comments. They were very interesting, actually, and it's a shame we don't have time to go through them. But do have a look at the comments to our audience, have a look at those and have a read. But they very point to actually exactly what we're talking about the agenda here in the UK. Birmingham Police, yes, West Midlands Police once again crop up, and Pierre Poilievre linked in Canada, and that whole Mandir story as well, the rude, the rude Hindus, as we refer to them. Now, Dave Singh, one of our, it turns out, as Dave Singh's fairly bombarded us with some fairly unpleasant and critical comments. But one of them I did pick out. Most of them were silly nonsense. And Dave Singh, if you are going to criticise, at least keep them sensible, and then we'll talk about them. And here's one of your more sensible ones. The rest we've ignored as just being silly. But this one says, Bhindranwale, despite false claims, never ever sought Khalistan. Khalistan was a mischief by Pakistan, exploited by immigration mafia, fake applications for asylums. Now, actually, this is quite a sensible comment, because Bhindranwale, he actually wasn't standing. He did not fight his last stand about Khalistan. It was all about simple human rights, and it actually stems back. The history goes way back to partition, and arguably even beyond that. But essentially, in 1973, the Anandpur Sahib resolution was drawn up as almost an act of desperation for the Indian government. Here is our list of demands. That list of demands wasn't actually about Khalistan. It wasn't about an independent state. It was about simple, basic autonomy. It was about the basic rights of access to irrigation, things like that. It was all about, please, here in the Punjab, the Sikh community, we just want our basic human rights. We want some level of autonomy to make our own decisions locally, and we want a fair allocation of our natural resources, and particularly irrigation rights from the rivers, etc. So the Anandpur resolution then evolved, and it was deliberately ignored by the Indian government. Indira Gandhi came into power, and that, of course, led up to Operation Blue Star. So actually, when you say, Dave Singh, Bhindranwale wasn't about Khalistan, he was to a degree, but it was more about the basic human rights, the basic autonomy of the Punjab. So you're right. Good comment. Thank you for that. Make good comments like that. The Pakistan side is nonsense. It's been disproven. That whole myth, the whole movement, the Khalistan movement, is nothing to do with Pakistan. It is not funded by Pakistan, despite many trying to argue that. That whole side has been completely debunked. The Khalistan movement is a movement that originates, is sourced essentially from the Sikh community within the Punjab. Nothing more. If money's coming in from Pakistan, it's unlikely. It's been disproven. But even if it was, it doesn't matter. The Sikh community is the core, is the foundation of the whole Khalistan movement. Wherever money comes from, the money comes from the West to support it. Again, it's all about Khalistan and the Punjab. So thank you for that comment. Enough of the silly nonsense. Right, Jasvinder. I didn't know this. The Indian state killed so many men in 1984 that there's a colony named the Widow Colony in New Delhi where all widows live. That's shocking, James, isn't it? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I have heard that in the past, Angus. Yes.
Yeah, it's thank you for highlighting that. That's again, what a sad indictment of India and what happened in 1984. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. Cruella says this is an interesting point where he talked about the police, the sexual assaults by the police of all people. And we said at the time that we should be able to trust and rely on the police. They are the people that we go to. They are the people that we trust to protect us, take care of us. And it turns out they sexually assaulted a woman. Cruella rightly says it used to be that girls were told, if you're in trouble, find a Sikh, a Sikh. Yeah, that's. I think that says a lot about the Sikh community, James.
Absolutely, and I think that it still stands today that they are a very reputable, very safe, and very helpful community to stand up for others.
Yeah, and I have to say, my involvement with the Sikh community and the Sikhs that I've got to know and become friends with, yeah, I totally endorse this. It's I've never a bad word to say about the community, and quite the opposite. I've been treated with most, not just wonderful hospitality, it's just the ethos, the philosophy that they, each and every one of them, live their lives by. Totally endorses, I think, what you say here, Cruella. So absolutely, thank you for highlighting that statement. And a final comment, B33-263 says, thank you, Angus and James. Well, thank you for your comment. You're both doing amazing work. It is a pleasure. Angus did a good job translating Punjabi. Well, our Punjab is improving, James.
It appears so, Angus.
And signing off with just to let us know that Sat Siri Akal literally means eternal God is the truth. So thank you for providing that translation. So now we know Sat Siri Akal and Sat Siri Akal to all our audience. But we are well over time as always, and perhaps even longer than usual. So we must rush through to the end now. But thank you once again for watching Perspectives. Please don't forget to keep your comments coming in. Loads have been coming in. Much appreciated. They've been wonderfully educational, very interesting. And thanks for all of those. Do keep them coming in. Don't forget you can message us directly at message@satellitv.com on anything you'd like to bring to our attention. But in the meantime, we must bring things to a close. It's a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.